big three narratives here, Maggie McClure's statement there, about how we tend to report the things that work. We often don't report the things that go belly up, where the big learning is. So hopefully, maybe we'll tease those ideas out. Before we begin, because we have people who are new here, now I don't know, has everybody watched Maureen's graphic on NEARIMeet? Because if you have, there's no point in playing it. Will I try anyway and see? Hopefully it'll run.
Yes.
Okay, so what Maureen put together here is a little graphic. There should be music going with it, but it doesn't matter. About the principles of self-study action research. So the next thing I have for you now is a task. Not what do you recall from that, but the first one is a question. It's the two pairs, Maureen, there.
Yeah, now I'm coming again just a minute. I want to get rid of this.
All right. The first one is a question personally, just on your own. So Think, Prayer, Share is going to go on here now. Do you believe, actually, that action research can make a difference? So obviously that has a yes or no answer. So how is the qualifier then, and to say how does it make a difference? So about a minute or two to just get your thoughts around how does it make a difference, and then you can discuss in pairs or threes or whatever is obvious there at your table, and then we take some feedback. So just to get us activated there. Doesn't feel they have any impact at all in the research, and so it's never I, and it's used by, you know, mathematicians, scientists, positivists of various kinds, and then the interpretive acknowledges that the researcher does have an impact in the research and is interpreting phenomenon, and acknowledges that they're interpreting through their own lens as well. And then the action research paradigm is about actors, agents, active people trying to improve the phenomena of their surroundings. So this idea of improvement or enhancement is automatically part of the paradigm. And this isn't the way, he says, that most action researchers choose to express their purposes, but it puts their paradigm into the context of the two other paradigms. And that obviously, if I'm talking about my research and my study into my practice, then of course I have to use I, you know. But and that's the hard one to get across to people, because people have an inbuilt idea sometimes of what research is, and this isn't it, you know. And then it seems to get all sorts of labels about being fluffy and being non-rigorous, but it's really rigorous. Somebody said to me recently, I was amazed how rigorous your research was when they read Enhancing 2. And I was, of course it's rigorous. It's probably even more rigorous, because you're really exposing, it is confessional, and you are exposing yourself to critique of others and to your own reflexivity as well. So that we look at the idea of being grounded in values, and our values there are often implicit, and trying to bring them out from this intuitive sense inside in ourselves and articulate them is the hard thing sometimes, because we hold them. And they're often, you know, easily enough split into two main categories: are epistemological values of how do we view knowledge, knowledge creation, knowledge acquisition, knowledge generation, who's a knower and who says, and where is knowledge. And if we are positioned as educators in the idea that knowledge is transmissible and is a reifiable package that we can hand to somebody, and it's out there somewhere separate from the knower, well, we teach in a certain way, or we practice in a certain way. So that view of knowledge, if I think it's in the books, it's in the internet, it's in the library, it's in my head as the teacher, these are the empty vessels, well then I'm going to teach in a certain way. And it influences my methodological values of how I work in the classroom, and I will stand at the top and deliver and lecture. Whereas if I see knowledge as constantly evolving, constantly temporary, constantly being renewed, then I can see that children can also be knowers who are on that path, on that trajectory of generating knowledge. And so I don't talk at them, I talk to them and with them, because I acknowledge them as knowers. So it's purely constructivist here, and co-constructivist and socially constructed knowledge, and drawing on Vygotsky and Brunner and Piaget, I suppose, as well. And then the other set of values, if you want to do a binary kind of split there, is the ontological. How I am in the world, everything to do with the universe, the world, and how I am in it, and my relation to everything in it. So if we take our interpersonal relationships, again, in a classroom, if I see myself as separate from the children, they're reified others, with a capital O almost, and I'm the teacher. So my relational values will be different. I'll speak differently. I'll behave differently in the classroom if I think I'm separate. Whereas if I think these are all very worthy eyes, as worthy as I am, as deserving of dignity and respect as I am, but very unique in our own personality, then we're all eyes, and we draw on Buber's theory of I, it, I, thou. It's very much an I-thou relationship. And we're co-researching with them, so it's not research on, it's research with. So those epistemological and ontological values inform how we are as teachers, and how we are as researchers, and how we are as writers, and how we live our lives, really. So I suppose that's what we were asking when we draw on, and you answered it really succinctly. It's that 40 minutes, how can I get the best with them and my relationship with them. So you summed it up in that sentence, Jennifer, really well. And it's morally, it's praxis, which is morally informed, committed action, hoping for an improvement that's life-affirming, sustainable, and for the common good. Because lots of people hold values, lots of people publish their values, like Hitler in Mein Kampf, but were they life-affirming, were they sustainable, were they for the common good? And they're words coming from Whitehead. So he says, when researchers provide explanations of their educational influences in their own learning, in the learning of others, and in the learning of social formations through questions such as, how am I improving what I'm doing? It's not influence on, which is imposition, it's influence in the learning. So it's invitational, it's an influence in their learning. Then, when we go back to that phrase of Bassi, improving the phenomenon of their surroundings. So this just from my own experience of working with other people, and I am saying, yes, these are victory narratives in a way, but it's not always a victory narrative. Believe me, I've had my failures within groups as well. But taking Tom's story, was a maths teacher in post-primary who had a group of first years. He was doing his masters in a group with me, examining his own practice. And these first years had come from an area that had a lot of little schools, and now they're in this huge secondary school, so they didn't know each other, and the children can get lost very quickly. But in the maths class, he was trying to teach computation within the 24-hour clock, and he discovered the kids nudging each other and saying, ask Johnny, and laughing. And Johnny couldn't even read o'clock. He couldn't, when the big hand is at 12 and the small hand is 4. Johnny had a problem. And he said to me, how am I going to teach this child? How do I teach? That was his question. How do I teach this child? And I remember saying to him, look, there must be a paper trail here. If the child is that challenged, can you access the file? He couldn't, for some bizarre reason, couldn't access the personal file, but he went on, I said, go back to the 6th class teacher. And he went back, now this is before GDPR, I don't know, can you even do that now? But the 6th class teacher provided him with the IEP and some of the resources that that child had had. And there's no happy ending that the child didn't suddenly become brilliant in maths, but the child became happier in school. And he built on, I suppose, the interpersonal relationships in that class improved. Yeah. But the principal, out of that 10-week study, the principal said, a bit like your story caught, maybe we need a better transition process from primary to post-primary. So they looked at that as an institution. So that small piece of study made a difference at that level, and also to the researcher. In Elaine's story, it's documented in our Learning Communities book, and this was a story about a child, a girl who had transformed her practice from being quite didactic into a very dialogical and constructive a space, and she was coming into our meetings, which we had in Cork, with all these amazing stories. And then one day, the children wanted a classroom magazine. They wanted different things, so she gave them what they wanted, and the classroom magazine. And then she brought in the magazine, and the rough draft was all scribbled and things written on it. And she said, "This is a lad who never, ever stepped out of line before. Don't know why he's doing this." And we put it into the middle, and everybody was saying, "God, you know." And one very quiet teacher in the group said, "Could this child be grieving?" And it turned out yes. And that the child's dad had died. Anyway, I'm not going into the nitty gritty of it, but it's in the book. Like buy the book. It's in the book, but the child was grieving and was becoming happy in school doing this magazine, and then was guilty for being happy because his dad had died. And so he began to try and get negative attention, and you know, it was, but I think her research saved that child's life, possibly, because he was in 5th class, he was acting out, he could possibly have gone into 6th, done even more, and gone into secondary and become one of those lads who was sitting outside the office and gone through the cracks. You know, we don't know, but I do know that it was an amazingly powerful story, and impacted on all of us, that how a throwaway remark can lead to such a huge piece of learning for all of us. John was an undergraduate doing self-study action research, mandated self-study action research for his final research project, final year project. And he, in 3rd year, had been in a school where there was huge fallout from between junior cycle and senior cycle. There was an awful lot of people leaving the system. So he came into 4th year, or into senior cycle, was back in the same school, which was unusual enough, and saw where all, you know, asked the question, where are all the students gone? And that loads of them had left after junior cycle. And he wanted to know what was happening, why were students leaving? It was a very challenged DESH school, very challenged circumstances in the school. And he came into me and he said, "I want to look at absenteeism and fallout, you know, from the post-primary sector." I said, "You've got 6 weeks. You know, what can you do in 6 weeks?" So I said, "Go away and think about it," and start with a "how do I" question. So he came back after the weekend and said, "How do I teach in a way that does not marginalise or exclude any child?" And he said to me, "Do you know, Mary, if every teacher in Ireland did that, maybe, you know, absenteeism and fallout would look after itself." So he wrote a really, really nice piece that changed his own story, changed his own practice, but also had huge impact, because he's now in a leadership role. Huge impact on his own and now in the lives of others.